Up now in Daniel chapter number 5. Now we're going to quickly go over Daniel 5. We're not going to be in there very long. It's going to deal with the end of the reign of the Babylonians. As Daniel has been in Babylon, he has seen many kings now come and go. He's going to see more come and go. He started off, of course, with the first king that he was exiled in, and the king Nebuchadnezzar, and then Nebuchadnezzar had a son. He became king, and then, of course, there was another one. And then we find, after this, though, chapter 5, a new nation is going to overthrow the Babylonian Empire. It will be the nation of the Medes and the Persians. So in chapter 5, we find that the Babylons are having a feast. Now, this feast is under Belshazzar, and this feast is going to be a pretty significant event because not only at the feast are they desecrating the items that were used by the Jews to worship God. They're desecrating them by using these items at a feast in honor and worship of their own false god, as well as the immorality that must have been taking place during this time. But not only that, during this time, God gives his final warning. Now, there's sometimes where the warning isn't fix the problem or else. Sometimes the warning is just, here's what I'm going to do. And this is the case with Belshazzar and the Babylonian subjects. At their feast, a hand, there is no body attached, there is no arm attached, it's just a hand, writes on the wall. And the writing on the wall cannot be read by anyone there. It is Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, and no one can read the writing. So, of course, they bring in wise men. No one can figure it out. Finally, they bring in Daniel. Daniel comes in and tells them that the handwriting on the wall is God's warning, God's final judgment on the Babylonian Empire for their wickedness. And this night, the kingdom will be taken from you and given to another, is the interpretation of God's writing on the wall. Have you had that writing on the wall? Oftentimes, the writing on the wall, as I said, is at a point where there is no adjustment that can be made before the judgment is coming. The phrase, the handwriting is on the wall, literally means judgment is coming, whether you like it or not. Now just prepare yourself for what is destined for the near future. And so God is telling the Babylonians, prepare yourself. Tonight, the nation will transfer from your empire to another. Now, Daniel's actually mocked during this time, even though Daniel was promised to be given authority in the kingdom. And because he gives the answer, we're told that there's, jesting and probably laughing. And they throw a robe on Daniel and they mock him and say, oh, Daniel, you silly guy. No one can defeat the Babylonians. We've been a world power for some time. Don't you know that? And we're going to go ahead and abide by our agreement, though. We're going to give you some authority even though we don't believe you deserve it. Now, the Babylonians were actually a very strong empire. In fact, it is said that the way that the Medes and the Persians entered into the capital city that night was under the walls through the irrigation system, basically through the water that would come through the walls. They had some kind of a grate there, and you weren't able to defeat the walls. You couldn't climb them without being overthrown. You wouldn't be able to bust them down, but the grate itself was a weakened part of the wall, and they would have torn that out, and then the soldiers would have single file or double or whatever, triple, however many could get through, go under the wall till there was enough inside the city to finally overtake the city. It's likely that as Daniel is giving this prophecy, the soldiers are at that moment crawling under the wall. And as the Babylonians are mocking Daniel, and as King Belshazzar and his other subjects are laughing in disdain at God's judgment, at that very moment, the soldiers are possibly in the shadows coming under the wall and preparing themselves to attack the city. King Belshazzar will be killed that night, assassinated, and the very next day, the city of Babylon will be under the authority of the Medes and the Persians and King Darius. We get into chapter 6, and we find that Darius is now king of Babylon. And Darius is impressed with Daniel. Daniel seems to have prepared himself to meet this king. The other advisors probably had shell shock on their face, and as they met the king, were in fear, not knowing what would happen. But Daniel was very confident of his position in the Lord, his position of this life and the next, and probably handled himself very wisely, I'm sure. And Darius was impressed and automatically set Daniel up as an advisor in Babylon. Now, what an interesting thought. King Darius, instead of killing all the Babylonian advisors and getting rid of all of the authority figures who had been set up by Belshazzar, Darius wisely decided, I'm only going to basically take out Belshazzar himself, and maybe there's a few other key people that were killed, but we're going to keep most of them and give them positions of authority to appease the people of Babylon so that they don't revolt. So that basically it's life as usual for most of you guys. Yes, there's a change of power, but the common man won't even recognize it. The common man, you still got the same people over your region of the city. It's the same tax collectors. It's the same advisors. It's the same marketplace that you go to. Yes, there's soldiers who dress differently, and they are monitoring the corners. But go about your business. Everything is as it was the day before. And yet, that was not the case. There was a completely new authority figure set up over the city of Babylon. But this new authority figure is trying to convince the people everything is the same. Isn't that how it's done even today? Authority changes, but they try to convince people, nothing to see here, keep moving on, right? Let us do our job, let us do what we want to do, and we'll just pretend that nothing out of the ordinary is taking place, whether that is politically or spiritually. I believe that Satan, his demons, spiritual darkness, will do their very best to change the authority figures in your life and to get a major shift in the direction of, yes, the culture of America, but also the culture of your family. But trying to convince you, nothing to see here, keep moving on. You're still able to go to Walmart. Your car still starts. You still have a bank account with some money in it. And you have a job. Nothing to see here, keep moving on. While that very night, there was a major change in the direction your family was taking. The cultural shift would be noticeable to anyone with spiritual eyes to see it. And yet you're trying to be convinced, nothing to see here. Now, Darius takes over. Daniel is set up. Of course, the other advisors are not too thrilled about that. Now, why would they care? Wasn't Daniel already a top advisor? Under Nebuchadnezzar, wasn't he the second in command? Yes. But this last king wasn't Nebuchadnezzar, was it? It doesn't seem that under Belshazzar that Daniel was allowed to continue in that position. Now, in some cultures, the older you get, the more authority you are given. And that would have been this one. To be old and aged would have been looked upon with honor. So it's not that Daniel got old and therefore was thrown to the wayside. I think it comes down to this. Nebuchadnezzar experienced firsthand the wisdom of Daniel and the power of God through Daniel. Belshazzar had not, up until the night he was killed. So it didn't do him much good. Belshazzar was an extremely wicked king. Nebuchadnezzar was as well, but Nebuchadnezzar eventually got saved. Remember we talked about how King Nebuchadnezzar actually wrote the chapter 4 of Daniel himself, so it implies his salvation, talks about how he saw Jehovah differently as well himself. So Belshazzar, not being a Christian, Belshazzar having no love for God Jehovah, didn't want a man like Daniel around telling him what to do. Now, I unfortunately couldn't make it to the service tonight. This morning I was not feeling well, but I was listening online. And Pastor Jimmy nailed it this morning when he talked about, look, you don't necessarily have to push people out of your life, right? If you just do what's right, they're going to walk away from you. And that's what's going on with Daniel. Daniel didn't have to walk away from Belshazzar. Daniel didn't have to say, I can't be your advisor. I am very convinced Daniel just did what Daniel always does. And Belshazzar says, well, I'm not going to have you advise me if you're going to judge me and tell me how I ought to live a moral life, or whatever it is that Daniel might have mentioned. So Daniel's pushed to the wayside, and at that point, other advisors are put in his place. So Daniel at one point was second in command, then was no longer, and now these men are used to the position of authority they have been given. Darius comes in and does what? Sets Daniel back up in a position of authority. Again, because old age was looked upon with honor. Darius would have seen Daniel's old age, his wisdom, and obviously did not care so much about Daniel's morals. It's possible Darius was a somewhat moral man. I'm not saying a Christian, but maybe had higher morals than Belshazzar at least, right? And so it would have been okay with the way Daniel handled himself. Set Daniel back up, which means bump these other guys back down, and they were not pleased about that. So right away, what do they start doing? Conspiring. Conspiring against Daniel. Now, let me tell you, I actually said this the other week when I was preaching Sunday morning, and a week from today, I mentioned Pastor Jimmy's getting ordained in just a few short weeks. And I said, one of the hardest times of Pastor Jimmy's life and family, I've already warned you guys publicly in our church, is going to be the months following that time. Because once you are set up in a position of authority, you got to be prepared to be attacked spiritually. It's going to happen. And sometimes it's not spiritually. Sometimes it literally is people in your life who will come up against you. People that should not. People that you would not expect to, but they will. And Daniel is set up, and immediately he's got enemies. He's made enemies for no other reason than that he was given positions of authority. And so these enemies are not the kind of enemies that just look at you and scowl at you and call you names. These guys literally want you dead. Now, do you got people like that in your life where they literally would be happier with you dead? And if maybe it's not that extreme, they at least want you exiled on some island somewhere, never to be seen again, right? Is that the way a Christian ought to view our enemies? We want our enemies dead. We want our enemies exiled to an island where no one can see them ever again. And yet have you heard preachers state that very thing? That America would be better off if you took a group of people, whatever group they fit into, whether it's a moral decision or whether it's a way that they handle the politics of the culture, politicians, whatever they disagree with, preachers will say, let's just take them, throw them on an island, and let America be better off, right? And yet what does Christ say, how we should view our enemies? To love them. Turn the other cheek. Take the burden they ask you to bear and walk another mile with it, the extra mile. So these men represent how the world views their enemies. It ought not represent how Christians view our enemies. And yet, unfortunately, they are one and the same. The world and Christians have the same view of their enemies, which is not a biblical response. So these men, of course, set Daniel up. We know the story. They go to King Darius. They say, Darius, you're a great guy. Good job destroying Babylon, something that had not been done in decades. You're quite the man. You're quite the military guy. You deserve to be honored in a way that no other king has been honored, at least in our lifetime, and that is to be honored above even the gods. Now, they didn't mention Jehovah God specifically. They just would have mentioned gods in general. And Darius, of course, I don't believe he is a Christian, might have had moral standards in the sense of, let's not kill the innocent and let's not live excessive immoral life, but the guy's not a believer. So it's no big deal to him to be set up above the gods, kind of, shoots adrenaline to his pride and says, hey, that's not a bad idea, let's do it. So these men have King Darius enact a law, and then Daniel, hearing the law, knows, practically speaking, it means that he cannot worship or pray to God Jehovah, or he will be judged, and the judgment was the lion's den. So here is a question for you. Why would Daniel choose to still worship in front of the window? Could Daniel have still worshiped God, accomplished what his commitment was to God Jehovah, while not being arrested? Could he not have done it in his closet? Could he not have done it with the windows closed? It wasn't like these guys came into his house and were watching him. They were watching from outside the house. Daniel literally chose the one place in the house where everyone saw him, right by the window. Why would Daniel do that? What do you think? Carla? It was his habit, but Daniel was not like, oops, what am I doing in front of the window? It was a habitual act. No, Daniel knew full well that I'm going to do this. They enacted that law to take me down, and by doing this, they'll see me.
I'm thinking they knew that this is what he does every
yes.
day. He prays to his God, so this is how we're going to get.
Yes, that is correct. But why would Daniel still pray in front of the window then? Why? You can still pray and not be in front of the window. Okay, he is still trusting in God. Can he not trust in God and not throw away his life at the same time? He's not ashamed. Okay, I hear you. Just because you choose to have an underground church, does that mean that Christians are ashamed of God? There's a lot of underground churches throughout the world today that don't want to be shot for worshiping Christ. Doesn't mean they're ashamed of Christ. In fact, every day they risk their lives just for being Christians, even though their worship is underground. And I would never fault them for it. And I would never say, well, you need to go up in the cities and worship God and be shot while you're worshiping, otherwise you're a coward. That would be wrong of us to say. But that's basically what Daniel is doing. He's living in the Middle East, where in some countries it's illegal to be a Christian. And he goes up in the middle of the streets and says, I am a Christian. Why would he do that? That's basically what he's doing.
I believe because he knew that no matter what happened, God would deliver.
Okay, so Steve says no matter what, God would deliver him. You could say that, but even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the previous chapter said, we believe God will, but even if he doesn't, we're still willing to, which means we believe he will, but we don't necessarily know for sure that he will, but we're willing to die either way. Are you saying that's the attitude of Daniel?
No, I think he actually.
You think that God actually would? Okay. All right. Jimmy, what do you think?
I think being in his position, there's people watching him. There's young men, there's
Yeah. Yep, I agree. Hey, welcome, guys. So this is a Bible study. We normally have a kids program Sunday nights, and unfortunately, our director of the kids program is not here. We do have a nursery. If you'd like to bring your younger daughter, you don't have to. You're welcome. We got other kids in the building as well, so the talking doesn't bother me. It's like an informal Bible study, so please don't feel bad about any noise they make. It's not a big deal. All right, thanks for joining us. Okay, so I agree with you, Jimmy. Here's what I think. Daniel is not making this decision out of some form of pride, like, you know what, I'm gonna go up here and worship in front of the window because I want everyone to see that I'm not ashamed of my God. Daniel's not in it to show off. That's not his personality. I agree with Jimmy. I think Daniel recognizes that, look, he knows full well these people are doing this to test Daniel's commitment to Christ. Daniel knows he's committed to God, whether they know it or not. Daniel's not doing this for his benefit. He's not doing it for God's benefit. God doesn't need Daniel in front of the window for God to be honored by Daniel's life. Daniel is doing this to say that I still love my God, even though you put me in position basically to publicly deny him. For Daniel, it would have been a public denial of God to worship in secret. Let me explain it this way. I talked about the underground church. Okay, nothing wrong with underground churches. I'm glad there's churches that are worshiping God underground, because if they didn't, then they wouldn't be in existence. They would be arrested and killed, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. But it's a difference between someone worshiping underground. When I say underground, I don't necessarily mean, in caves, although it could happen. I just mean out of the view of the government, right? Whatever government is out to attack these churches in communist countries and other places. It's a difference between them worshiping underground and not trying to bring attention to themselves while being Christians versus someone coming into their home and saying, are you a believer? Now that you've been confronted, now you have to make a decision. Are you going to deny Christ, or are you going to publicly say, I am a believer, right? It's one thing to flaunt your Christianity in a place where when you do that, you know you'll be shot immediately. Something different to when confronted, now what do you do? And that's the position Daniel is in. Daniel's not in a position of he could worship it as an underground church, but decides to be in the middle of the street and say, I'm a Christian. It is like the idea of someone coming to his home and saying, are you a believer? Daniel now has to say, hey, either I'm going to deny Christ or I'm going to stand up for Christ. Daniel decides to stand up for him. Brave thing to do. Now, whether Daniel knew that God was going to allow him to live or not, I don't necessarily know. We can assume that might be the case. Daniel, of course, is arrested, thrown into the lion's den. Darius is saddened by this. He actually feels bad about this. Darius feels so bad. Do you guys remember how he felt that night? What happened? Couldn't sleep. The guy couldn't sleep. Now, this is an ungodly heathen king that could not sleep because of the guilt he felt from tossing his advisor into the lion's den. Now, do you think this is the first time this powerful man would have had someone killed? Oh, surely not. He thinks it's the first time this man ever killed someone himself. Guys, we're talking about a heathen warrior king of a massive empire. This guy didn't get to where he's at by being nice, okay? I'm talking some very violent behavior from this guy, probably from since he was a young age. This guy was killing people, all right? In battle, in the palace. We would probably call this guy a monster. If we saw how he lived his life and saw the people he killed and how he killed them, we'd say, you are a monster, Darius. And this monster of a man is feeling guilty. How is that even possible? That this kind of guy could feel guilty about having someone killed when this is nothing new for him? I think there's only one answer. And it's not because Daniel's such a great guy, anyone would feel guilty about that. No, that's not why. Why do you think Darius feels guilty? What? I think so. I think it's conviction of God. Look, so many of us have brothers, sisters, spouses, parents, children that are beyond wicked. Or they're heading in that direction, right? We're very, very concerned with their moral condition. And we just think, wow, they're beyond God's help. I mean, they are so immune to conviction. Their conscience is so seared, there's no way they could ever hear the conviction of God in their life. Look, if you think that, then you don't know God like I know God. And if you believe that, then you're not reading the same Bible that I'm reading. Because if Darius can feel guilt over that decision to have a guy killed, then anyone can feel guilt. Anyone can feel conviction. When God chooses to enact conviction on your heart, you're going to be convicted. Now, what you're going to do with that conviction is up to you. But conviction is something that God is capable of enacting on anyone and everyone. So let me tell you, when I was younger, 19, 20, I would pray that God would save people. In fact, I remember very vividly, I was directing a basketball tournament, and our goal was outreach. In this tournament, we had like 100-plus people come to this basketball tournament, most of them unsaved. And my friends and I, college students, we were very excited about this, and we were praying for literally months, praying for months. God, save. And I think we said, we're asking you to save 70 people. We didn't know how many would come in. We were hoping over 100. It was 1 to 200. It's been like 12 years now, so I forget the exact amount. But there was, I think, well over 150, close to 200 or so. And we were praying that God, at least save, I think it was like 75 people. Save 75. We prayed, save 75. And we thought, if we pray with faith, and if we believe that God will do this, we will see 75 saved. And months, we fasted, we prayed, literally 30-plus college guys and their girlfriends praying for months that God would save 75. We have the basketball tournament. Oh, man, we are excited. We see 150-plus people. We're thinking, this is great. Surely 175 are going to be saved just like we prayed. It was an exciting day. People got saved. We added them up, and guess how many? It wasn't 75. I remember it was like 30 to 40. You think 30 to 40, Pastor Russ, that's amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. You know what? We were discouraged. Can you imagine that? We were discouraged. Why were we discouraged at 30 to 40 getting saved? Because 75 weren't saved. And I forget the exact number, but whatever number that was, the number we prayed for. And I remember a lot of guys came to me. I was the leader, and I was the one leading them towards, let's pray to 75. Russ, why didn't we get to 75? They said, Russ, what's going on? We had faith. We really believed God was going to save 75. I didn't have an answer for him. I said, guys, I don't know. I prayed the same thing, and I believed the same thing. God knows what he's doing in the end. It's a beautiful thing what he did, but I don't know why he didn't answer that prayer at 75. And the tournament was over. Months went by. The other guys may have held on, forgot about it. I could not forget for months after this tournament. I just couldn't get over the fact that God didn't answer that prayer. And eventually I came to the realization, salvation is free, but it's not forced. Something I already knew. I knew that God didn't force it on me, but in my own immature, young mind, zealous mind, I guess I justified that God would force it on someone else, even though he wouldn't force it on me. And if I just had enough prayer faith, then God would force someone to be saved. And God never does that. You know what you can do is pray that God will convict people and then let them make the decision. Ever since that tournament, and that was years ago, my prayer life has changed regarding salvation. I no longer pray that God will save someone because God doesn't force salvation. What I do pray is that God will convict them and break them and bring them to a point where they have nowhere else to go but up. I pray that God will do whatever it takes in their life to get their attention. That is now my prayer life regarding those that are unsaved. I do not pray that someone would be saved because God will not force that on them. Now look, if God can convict Darius of his bad decision, God can convict anyone and everyone. Would you guys agree? All right. Here's Darius, convicted all night long. The guy can't sleep. Gets up early in the morning. Russ is out, has the stone rolled away. By the way, this has been a pit, and a stone rolled over, so the stone's rolled away, and Darius calls out, Daniel, Daniel, did your Lord rescue you? Did your Lord keep you safe? Daniel calls out and says, yes, King, yes, God has kept me safe. Shut the mouths of the lions. He said, send an angel down. How would Daniel know? Do you think Daniel might have seen the angel? Come on, Daniel's a man of visions, right? I think Daniel saw an angel. We see Daniel seeing some pretty amazing things. It's no small matter that Daniel would have seen an angel. How cool is that, right? This dark pit with growling, smelling lions, and you can't see the hand in front of your face, and all of a sudden, the whole pit lights up with an angel. And talk about a nightlight, right? This angel is your nightlight. And the angel, I don't know whether he went and wrestled the lion to the ground or pet the lion, held its snout closed. I don't know what he did. But in some manner, Daniel knew exactly what was going on. And Daniel slept with the lions that night. Slept with the lions. Now, some of us wish we had the opportunity to have an experience like Daniel. A lion's den opportunity. Let me tell you something. Every single Christian has the opportunity for a lion's den experience. The lion's den is purely the result of you standing up for Christ and spiritual darkness attacking you. That is your lion's den. You say, well, why didn't God shut up the mouths of the lions in my lion's den? Well, maybe you didn't have the faith or prayer life that Daniel did. And therefore, the lions you felt devoured you. The lions attacked you. You see, Daniel wasn't thrown into the lion's den purely because he was a Christian. He was thrown into the lion's den because he refused to reject his Lord and Savior publicly. Every Christian can have that opportunity, and that opportunity will become even more prevalent the further our culture goes towards spiritual darkness. My advice to you is to not ask for the lion's den experience, or let me put it another way, to ask for the David and Goliath experience. It's a similar scenario. Don't ask God for those because they're pretty scary when they come. My advice is you pray that God, when they inevitably will come, please prepare me for victory. And prepare me, the heart of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that if you choose to not let me survive the fiery furnace or the lion's den, if you choose that that will be my end, let me go courageously, knowing that in the end you have a plan, and whether you choose to rescue me or not, you are God, and I will not turn from you. That should be a prayer. Not that God brings it your way, but that when it's here, you're ready for it. Okay, well, of course, we know the story. After Daniel's brought out, who's thrown in his place? The wicked advisors. But not just the advisors. Who else was thrown? Again, Darius is not the nice guy that this story seems to portray him as. Darius had no guilt throwing these men, wives, and children into the lion's den. You say children, Pastor Russ. Well, I don't know. I don't know how old these were. But again, I want to remind you, just because the Bible records something for us doesn't mean God gives his approval of it. God didn't tell Darius to do this. Darius did it on his own. God isn't necessarily okay with children suffering for the sins of their fathers. In fact, according to the Old Testament, we know that God's not okay with that. But Darius was okay with it and said, your whole family's going to die. Now, were these kids 7, 8 years old? I don't know. But keep in mind, we're talking about advisors. Top advisors, I highly doubt these top advisors were 20-year-olds. I'm pretty convinced we're talking 50, 60, 70. So whatever children they have probably would have been in some form of advisory roles themselves, likely. Some position of authority in the palace. And the king just says, I'm cleaning house. You guys are all going to die. You know, you and all those that might have been corrupted by your deceitfulness, you're all going to be thrown into the lion's den. I think it's more likely we're talking adult children here rather than young children, but I don't know. Unfortunately, during wicked times like this, the innocent do suffer, whatever your definition of innocent might be. Okay, we're done with the story of the lion's den and what led up to it. Are there any questions or comments about the writing on the wall or the lion's den?
Yeah,
Steve, go ahead.
At the lion's den, I'm wondering, so after the Persians took over
Babylon, yep.
Babylon, if they seemed like Daniel, his witness, they had heard all about him, they knew he was a godly man, his reputation and all that type of stuff, because in verse 16 it says, the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy God whom thou servest continue.
Yeah, so he knew about Daniel's God. Yeah.
I'm wondering if he...
All right, so you're asking how far had Daniel's testimony spread throughout the kingdom? Well, I mean, at this point, Daniel's fairly old. I think very far. So I think it's very likely that they would have heard already stories of Daniel having just arrived, for sure. But according to Daniel chapter 6, verse 3, he was preferred above all the others because of the spirit that was in him. It's not because of his testimony, according to verse 3, although I'm sure that was something Darius would have heard. According to verse 3, it is purely Daniel. Darius meets Daniel and says, wow, I'm impressed. You guys ever been with someone before, and it's like the first conversation you have, you just walk away and say, I'm impressed with that person. Like that person is just someone I want to get to know better. Have you ever had the opportunity to hire someone, and you were brought in for advice, or you're doing the hiring, and right away you knew, this person I want on my team. I'm like, this person has qualities I want. That's what I'm getting from chapter 6, verse 3. This was a job opportunity. Daniel came and was interviewed, and Darius just said, wow, Daniel, you're the guy. All right, anyone else? Scott.
Along those lines, I find it interesting that Darius called out, hey, Daniel, basically, are you alive?
Yeah.
Quite frankly, for me, I just figure he's dead.
Right, yeah, but Darius already assumed Daniel might have been alive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
testimony, that witness,
Yeah.
the demeanor, and everything else. I had a quick question though. Do you think it's possible, kind of like the scenario with Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego,
Yeah.
Daniel was out? Do you think it's possible that those three might have just been?
So we don't hear about them again. It's possible they're dead now. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at this point are dead. This is towards the end of Daniel's life. He's getting, on in years. Daniel is going to live longer than this, at least a couple more kings after Darius. But we don't ever hear from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego again. So, yeah, one of two things. Obviously, either they're dead or they are abroad somewhere, just as Daniel was abroad when they were in the fiery furnace. Good point. All right, anyone else? Any comments or questions? Okay, now, get out your seat on the prophecies. We're going to get into the more intense portion of this Bible study, and I am going to do my best to make it understandable for you while also succinct. I'm not going to be spending a large portion of time on this. There are classes that are literally an entire semester, Bible college class, entire semester on just the book of Daniel alone. I am going to now take the next 20, 25 minutes and give you in 20, 25 minutes what entire semesters are spent on. So please, do not hold my feet to the fire on why didn't you mention this? Why didn't you mention that? Where is this? Where is that? Remember, you are a smaller group, Bible study, one night, not college age seeking to become pastors, right? If you have more questions regarding these prophecies, you can ask them at the end. I'll open it up for questions, or you can talk to me later. I'd be glad to give you more details, but I'm not here to bore you tonight. I just want to give you enough information to kind of get your mind working and to give you the courage to say, you know what? I could read now the book of Daniel with a better understanding and actually appreciate what I'm reading. If you can do that, then I have succeeded. So here we go. Daniel chapter 7. I broke it down for you by chapters on my notes. So Daniel chapter 7, I'm not going to be reading all these verses. We don't have time for that. But this chapter is dealing with the vision of what's referred to as the four beasts. The vision of the four beasts. Now, verse 1, we're told that it was, the vision was given during the first year of Belshazzar. That's the king of Babylon. That's that wicked king that mocked Daniel. So this is still under Babylonian rule. He's given this vision. We're told about four beasts that come out of the water, and each of these beasts look different. There's one that looks like a lion. I say looks like a lion, but he has wings. Another one in verse 5 looks like a bear, has 3 ribs in its mouth. Those 3 ribs, some commentators think that it's the leftover of maybe devouring other countries, and those ribs represent the destruction that is caused in other countries. Others think it might be the authority figures set up within it. And then you have in verse number 6, a leopard had 4 wings. And then number 7, we're told of just a beast. And it's not really given a name. It just says a beast like none other. But it seems to be described kind of like a dragon. And we're also told in other prophecies of a similar scenario where it is a dragon, in Revelation especially. So I'm just going to call it dragon here. All right, so the first one, the lion, is the Babylonian Empire. The bear is the Medo-Persian Empire. The leopard is the Grecian Empire, the Greeks. And the dragon is the Roman Empire. Eventually is directed and overseen by the Antichrist. Basically, Daniel chapter 7 is a similar vision to that of Daniel chapter number 2. Remember in Daniel 2, where King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and there was a large statue? Remember that large statue had the head of gold? And then the torso, you might say middle section of silver, then bronze, and then a mixture of metals down at the legs and the feet. Remember that? And remember, each one represented a different nation, right? What was it? Head was what? Babylon. The middle portion was Medes of the Persians. After that was Greeks. And then at the bottom it was the Roman Empire. This is the same thing in a different wrapping. Same present, different wrapping. It's the same vision, different illustration. And what is that? We are just told about the different countries, the different nations, and how one will follow the other. So, of course, the first one is the Babylonian Empire. Remember, it's under Belshazzar. The Babylonians are still in power. After them will come the Medo-Persian Empire. After that was the Grecian Empire. And then the final one, the Roman Empire. Now, Daniel chapter 2 kind of focuses on the head of gold because it's the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar's excited about that, how he's a great king and all that kind of stuff. But it ends with a large stone, remember, bigger than anything else, not made by the hands of man, and destroys and wipes away the whole statue, right? Well, this one, we're told about the 4 beasts. The final beast, the dragon, has horns, 10 horns. And then out of the 10 horns, 1 horn sets itself up as an authority figure and actually has eyes and a mouth and starts talking in this vision, a talking horn, kind of creepy. But this talking horn, we're told, defeats 3 other horns and then subdues the remaining horns. All right. The dragon does represent the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire is basically illustrated as to be overseen and directed by Satan himself. By the way, wasn't the Babylonians, Medes, Persians, Grecians, aren't they all seats of Satan? Yes, they are. Because if God's not your father, then who is your father? Satan is your father. That's right. These are wicked kingdoms. So at some point, they're all servants of Satan. The Romans, of course, no different than any other. But it is said that in the Revelation period, when these kingdoms rise up again in the Revelation period, that they're kind of like a remnant of the Roman Empire or a revitalizing of the Roman Empire. Think of it this way. It seems that Hollywood has run out of ideas. What do they keep doing now? What is it? Reruns. Well, yeah, you could say rerun is technically the same movie shown again. They're not necessarily doing reruns. What are they doing? Remakes, right? Taking old, trying to make it look new with newer actors, newer lines. Some of them not even that. It's like the exact same thing almost. And then with the new packaging and saying, here you go, something new. It's actually something old. So that's kind of how you should think of the Roman Empire. During the time of Revelation, in the future, the tribulation period, you're going to have what looks like to be something new, but it's just a repackaging of something old. It's going to be a kingdoms that look like it's a new thing, but really just a repeat of an old thing, the Roman Empire. Okay, so the 4th beast is the Roman Empire. Of course, it's going to die down. I mean, the Roman Empire is not set up right now, but it's going to come back up, and when it does, there will be 10 kings who are basically united together in this Roman Empire in the final years of earth. And these 10 kings will then have one who will set himself up above the rest, which will be who? The Antichrist. And then we're told about this, by the way, in verses 19 to 26 of Daniel 7. The explanation of this chapter is given to us in 19 to 26, and we're told that this basically is a man who will set himself up above the others. He'll defeat 3 kingdoms, subdue the rest. But then we're told how the Messiah will defeat him, and the saints will eventually rule themselves, and all these powerful, wicked kingdoms will be no more. And now it will be the Messiah and his saints reigning forever. So Daniel chapter 7 is a prophecy of the eventual overthrow of the world by Jesus and his saints. And it's just a historical prophecy of the nations that will defeat nations that will defeat nations up until that time. You say, Russ, what about those, at least at this point, 2,000 years between the death of Christ and the tribulation period? There have been other countries that have had world power, right? The Germans on multiple occasions, not just under Hitler, but before him, there were other German dictators and people who had power. England has had world power, right? You could say America is a world power. So why are they not in this prophecy? When you look at Daniel, Daniel only deals with prophecy in relation to the Jews. What time are we living right now? The time of the Gentiles. It is not that during this time of 2,000 years there haven't been other nations, world powers, other than the Romans. That has been the case. But Daniel has not been given that vision. God, in this text, is not giving us that information because in the book of Daniel, Daniel is a prophet to the Jews. And at the time of Christ's death, the time of the Jews ends. The time of the Gentiles begins. When will the time of the Gentiles end? At the rapture. When will the time of the Jews begin again? After the rapture. And that is why you have in this book what seems to be a seamless transition from one empire to the next. Whereas in reality, there's at least 2,000 years because it's the time of the Gentiles, not the time of the Jews. So don't be concerned about that omission. And don't think that God's word is wrong. This prophecy is not dealing with the Gentiles. All right, any questions about chapter 7? Now you have a better understanding. It is the time of the Jews, seamless. So it's the Babylonians, Medo-Persians, Grecians, Romans leading up from the time of Christ and then cutting off, but then picking back up again in the tribulation period. A remake of an old nation, the Romans, remade again, and then Antichrist taking over during the tribulation period, and then Jesus Christ wiping them all out, and then him and the saints ruling after that. That's what chapter 7 is talking about. It's basically a little mini version of Revelation with a whole lot less information. Okay, Daniel chapter 8. We now read of the vision of the ram and the goat. Ram of the goat. It actually takes place during the 3rd year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So again, Babylonian Empire still in place. And we're told in chapter 8, let's go ahead and turn there. Verse 2, and I saw in a vision, came to pass, when I saw that I was at Shushan the palace. Verse 3, lifted up mine eyes, behold, there stood in the river a ram with 2 horns, and one were higher than the other. The higher came up last. And then verse 4, I saw the ram push westward, northward, southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will. The ram, this 2-horned ram, represents the Medo-Persian Empire. By the way, 2 rams, Medes, Persians. Why do we call it the Medo-Persian Empire? It was 2 nations that basically were come together under one ruler, but kind of allowed to still be their own nation, but they both answered to one head guy. This one head guy was basically the king over 2 nations, and they were given the distinct honor of still being called the Medes and the Persians, but you're together now. You're like a family, but you're both under me, but you're both kind of separate while together. So 2 horns, Medes and the Persians, of the ram, and they went north, they went south, they went west, and no one could defeat them. Basically, they were vicious, and no one could stand before them. But then finally, this 2-horned ram meets a 1-horned goat. And when this 2-horned ram meets a 1-horned goat, who wins? The 1-horned goat defeats the 2-horned ram. And the 1-horned goat represents who? The Grecian Empire, and that 1 horn would represent Alexander the Great. The man you've heard from history? Yes, that's who we're talking about here. Alexander the Great, the ruler of the Grecian Empire, is going to defeat the Medes and the Persians. And then we're told, I'm not getting in for sake of time, not reading all these verses. You can kind of glance at them as I'm going through it. But in chapter 8, we're told how from the 1 horn, there are 4 horns. And these 4 horns basically take different parts of the kingdom. And after Alexander the Great dies at a young age, I believe he's 33, are you aware that he had 4 generals that took over different parts of the kingdom? And by the way, not in a kind way. These guys ended up being enemies. These 4 generals took over different parts of Alexander the Great's kingdom and started warring against each other. Now, out of these 4 generals, there was 4 different kind of, you could say, divisions of now the Grecian Empire. There was one particular man of all of the rulers of the Grecian Empire, and from these generals, one particular man who stood out above the rest as a cruel man, specifically towards the Jews. Historically, his name is Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, this guy was crazy. In fact, he was given the nickname crazy within the Greek word. They used the Greek word to define him as crazy because he was just a wild man, like, vicious, angry, violent, crazy wild man. And he focused that hate and wildness towards one particular nation. Now remember, the Grecians were world conquerors. He would have conquered nation after nation, but there was one particular one under his authority he did not like. Can you guess who it was? It was the Jews. Hated the Jews, persecuted them mercilessly. By the way, during this period of actual history, under Antiochus Epiphanes, you'll find the history as recorded in the books of Maccabees. Now, the books of Maccabees, it's 1 and 2, is actually, I believe it's one in Maccabees 1 and 2. Haven't read them in a while, but I believe there's some people that believe that they're actual, like, legitimate Word of God. It should be in the Bible. The Catholics are one of them. They believe that. I don't believe that's true. I believe they are historical documents. I believe that the Maccabees are historical accounts of a historical period that we're not aware of in the Bible, but it is a Jewish historical period during that time of Malachi and the birth of Christ, between those hundreds of years of what you might call prophetic silence. So God is basically saying through Daniel, look, just so you're aware, when that time comes, and I'm not giving you prophets, and I'm not giving you explanation of what you're going through, I'm going to give it to you now through Daniel before you even get there. So that when you're going through it, you will know that I knew all along that you would go through it, and that I have not abandoned you, I have not forgotten you. You know, sometimes when we're going through difficult periods in our life, God is not going to reveal himself to us. You can ask for him to, you can beg for him to, he just won't. Why not? I don't know. But I do know this. If God is not revealing himself to you now, I guarantee you, he would have earlier. And what you need to do when you're going through a period of your life where it seems that God is silent to you, and it's not because you're away from him, not because you're living in rebellion, for whatever reason, God is not giving you those amazing God experiences that you had before. You need to go back to the times he did and remember those. God is giving the Jews an amazing opportunity to know what their future will be. But when that future is there, God's not going to give it to them again. God is, in essence, going to be silent. And he's going to expect that they would go back to what was already given them. Let me tell you, God's given you a lot. There will come a time in your life where God may not give you as much for a short time. You have to remember to what he's already given you. Okay, so we're told in the chapter 8 about a small horn that's very vicious and cruel. And verses 23 through 24, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in chapter 7. Let's go to chapter 8. Excuse me. All right, so 23. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance, understanding dark sentences, shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper. Destroy wonderfully. He shall be a vicious king. All right, any questions about chapter 8? So, this is not dealing with the tribulation period. This is not dealing with Messiah or long-term down the road revelation. It is dealing purely with the transition from the Medo-Persian Empire to the Grecian Empire and the effect it will have on the Jews, and that the Greeks will fight amongst themselves, the four generals, and eventually there will be one king who will hate the Jews and attack them. Any questions? Chapter 8. Okay, chapter 9. We're now getting into the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Daniel chapter 9, we're told that this takes place during the first year of Darius, king of Persia. Yes, that is that same Darius of Daniel in the lion's den. So during that same year, God gives Daniel a vision, and we're told that it's a vision concerning the Messiah's arrival, sacrifice, and the final confirmation of the covenant with Israel. Now, during this vision, we're told Daniel had prayed for a long time regarding the Jews' return. Chapter 9, in verse number 2, I, Daniel, understood by the books of the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. Daniel said, I was doing some reading, and I remember reading Jeremiah, and lo and behold, I recognized that our time of exile is almost done. We only got so many years left before we should be able to go back home. And Daniel begins to pray to God and says, God, if our time is coming to an end here, are you going to fulfill your promise? And will I be allowed to go back home? Maybe Daniel's praying for himself. Will you let me go back? And we're told that Daniel prays concerning God's promise of Israel's return. And so God responds to Daniel's prayer. And the first 19 verses is just Daniel's prayer to God. Beautiful prayer. You should read it on your own. Verse 20, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin, the sin of the people, we're told in verse 21, I was speaking the prayer, and Gabriel, that's the angel Gabriel, came in a vision to him. And we're told in verse 22, he informed me and talked with me and said, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. Now the rest of the verses, the angel Gabriel gives Daniel the prophecy of the 70 weeks. I'm not going to read that for you. I'm just going to explain it to you, and then you can read it on your own. First of all, when reading this later, you should know that there are 70 weeks in this prophecy. You should also know each week represents 7 years. So 70 times 7, how many years total are we talking about here in this prophecy? 490 years. So Gabriel is giving Daniel a prophecy of 490 years. Wow, that's amazing. All right, let's find out what it is. He says, first of all, I have here little b, from the decree of Darius to allow the Jews to return, and the actual rebuilding of the temple would be 7 weeks, 49 years. So Gabriel says, hey, from the time that you will be allowed to go forth, it's not from right now, but from the time that your people will actually head back home and the time that the temple will actually be rebuilt will be 49 years. And then he says, after that, from that time, from the rebuilding of the temple to the time that the Messiah will be cut off, will be 62 weeks, which is how many years? I put it on there for you. 434 years. That's right. So, 49 from the time they head back to the time of the rebuilding of the temple. After that, another 434 until the Messiah is cut off. Not until the Messiah is born or baptized, but the time he's what? Cut off or crucified. The time he's killed on the cross. Now, would the Jews know the exact year that the Messiah would be born? No, they would not. Should they know the exact year he would die? Yes, they should, according to Daniel's prophecy. That is why the wise men from the east were looking for the star, because they had a general idea the Messiah should be born around this time. But we don't know necessarily the exact day or year. That's also why maybe no one else was looking, because they didn't have an exact year. There was a general time, and maybe they just didn't care. So, we're then told, after he's cut off, there was 1 week remaining. How many years does a week equal? Do you remember? 7 years. 7 years. So there are 7 years remaining after the Messiah is cut off. But have there not been more than 7 years since Christ died? What did I tell you, though? After Christ dies, the time of the Jews, what? Ends. And Daniel's prophecies only deal with what? Time of the Jews. The time of the Gentiles end at the rapture. Once the rapture takes place, the time of the Jews does what? Begins again. So what also begins again? Daniel's prophecy. How many weeks are left of Daniel's prophecy? 1 week. Revelation tells us there will be how long of a tribulation period? 7 years. A week is what? 7 years in Daniel's prophecy. This final week of Daniel's prophecy is dealing with what? The 7-year tribulation. That is yet to happen. And Daniel is told that during that 7-year tribulation, he's told in the midst of that week, the temple will be desecrated, an abomination of desecration. What does that mean? It means a false god will be set up in the temple of the Jews to be worshipped. Who's going to do that? The Antichrist. Who already did it? Well, who's going to do it in the Old Testament? I told you. Remember during the Grecian reign? Who's going to set up a false god? It's actually going to be Zeus to be worshipped. It's that Grecian king, Antiochus Epiphanes. He was basically an Old Testament version of the Revelation Antichrist. He was not the Antichrist, but he's kind of a picture of the Antichrist. He did it in the Old Testament. Who's going to do it in the New Testament? The Antichrist. And the Antichrist is going to do it during the tribulation period, halfway through those 7 years. And we're told that in Daniel chapter 9. Then we're told that this final week is what? What is God going to do during this final week? Confirm the covenant with his people. That sounds like a good thing. Confirming the covenant means like, I'm going to give you peace and grace and slap you on the back and hug you and tell you I'm so happy to see you. But is that what happens during those 7 years? No, during the 7 years of tribulation, what happens? Death and destruction all around. Let me explain something. The confirming of God's covenant with the people of Israel is the culmination or the final act of God's promise to judge the enemies of Israel. And that is exactly what God is going to do during the 7 years. He's going to confirm his promise with Israel. What promise? The promise that I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Your enemies are my enemies, God basically says. And it is during the 7 years of tribulation that God is going to confirm that promise. And the enemies of Israel, who is the world, will be judged during those entire 7 years. And that will be God saying, I followed through with my promise. Now, let's reign together for the rest of eternity. Now, there is that only 1,000 years, and then Satan comes back, but that's only a short time, and then he's annihilated, and then it is on to eternity from there. All right, any questions about Daniel 9 and the 7 weeks? I'm sorry, 70 weeks. Okay, let's go. We're almost done. Daniel chapter 10. This is a prophecy of the great man. It's told we're in a vision during the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Now, this vision of a great man, we're told about this great man, and you can read about it in Daniel chapter 10. We're not really told who this man is. Some think it's an angel. Some think it's Jesus Christ himself. I don't really know who it is, but it is interesting to kind of guess who it might be. But either way, it's a vision concerning the defeat of the Medo-Persian Empire by the Grecian Empire again. So it's another vision similar to that of the ram and the goat. Daniel had been praying to God, but was not immediately answered. Verses 12 through 13, we're told that finally, when Daniel is answered, we're told why the answer was not given originally. Verse 12, he said, "Fear not, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and did chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I came for thy words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me." Who's the prince of the kingdom of Persia? Satan. Satan is the prince of the world. He's the prince of Persia, the world power. So at this point, Persia is the world power. And this man came to Daniel and said, "Daniel, I heard your prayer 3 weeks ago. And I wasn't here 3 weeks ago, even though I was on my way 3 weeks ago, because I was stopped by Satan himself, the prince of Persia." Now, the reason I don't think it's Jesus is that I don't think Jesus is going to be stopped by Satan. So I think this is an angel. And this angel is a messenger by God to give Daniel God's answer. God allowed the angel to be stopped by Satan. Why God allowed it, I don't know, but he did. But we're told that this angel was helped by another angel. And finally another angel showed up. And who was that? Michael, verse 13. Michael, we're told, helped, showed up, defeated Satan, at least temporarily, and allowed this angel to now make his way to give Daniel the message that God had. And what was the message that this angel had for Daniel? Basically, the message was this: the Medo-Persian Empire will be overthrown by the Grecian Empire due to the spiritual intervention of Christ and his angels. Verse 20. He says, this angel says, "Knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now I'll return to fight with the prince of Persia." Again, who is that? Satan, really. Spiritual darkness, right? "And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia will come." Who's the prince of Grecia? Well, you could still say Satan again, but basically, when I leave, I'm going to defeat the Persian Empire. And when I defeat the Persian Empire, that will allow now another empire to take over. And who will that be? The Greeks. So, as spiritual forces are warring, did you know that does have an effect on the actual politics of a country? Because of Michael and this angel's efforts to defeat the spiritual darkness of a particular empire, they lost their political power as well. And when they lost their spiritual power, they lost their political power, and now a new empire takes place, the Grecian Empire, and now that will become the seat of Satan, because Satan will just transfer from one to the next. Okay, that's the vision of chapter 10. A whole lot simpler than you might think. Any questions about this vision of the great man, who I think is an angel? Some think it's Christ. I disagree. Okay, we're almost done. Chapter 11. This is the prophecy of the destruction of the Medo-Persian Empire by the Grecian Empire again. Lots of prophecies regarding the destruction of the Medes and the Persians. This is now the third one, specifically dealing with the Greeks are going to take over the Medes and the Persians. So this one, in the first year of Darius, king of Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire will go strong under the fourth king, who is Xerxes. So in this chapter, you'll read how the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians will get stronger and stronger until the fourth king. He will be the strongest of the kings, and that is historically Xerxes. And by the way, Xerxes was a world conqueror if there ever was one. That guy knew how to fight, and he conquered a lot of nations, just as God's word said he would. We're told that this fourth king will have no one who can attack him. No one who can defeat him, until finally he makes his way and comes up against the Greeks, and meets his match. And Alexander the Great takes him out. The Greeks take him out. Similar to the goat and the ram. Remember? The two-headed ram and the one-horned goat. The one-horned goat, the two-headed ram is two-horned goats looking everywhere. Everyone's too weak to defeat him. Victory everywhere. Finally meets the one-horned goat, and the one-horned goat takes him out. Similar thing here. This fourth king is strong. No one can defeat him. Finally comes up against the Greeks, and the Greeks defeat him. Now, we're told that in this same illustration, similar to the one about the one-horned goat, that the one king who defeats this great king of the Medes and the Persians, the one king of the Grecians, will eventually split up into four, and then the remaining four will eventually have two great nations of these four who will fight against each other. The remaining portion of Daniel 11 gives you historical prophecy. And if you were to go back and read history and what happened with the Grecian Empire after the four generals and how they split into two main kingdoms, and you had basically Syria and the Egyptians, which at one point were under the Grecian Empire. And for some time now, these countries just fight against each other. They try to overthrow each other through politics, through marriage, through wars. And Daniel chapter 11 is giving that prophetic history of a time period that has not happened yet. But now when we look back and read it, and if you were to read chapter 11 and the actual historical time, Daniel 11 is giving a very detailed prophetic account of what will literally happen with these two kingdoms of Greece. I'm not going to give you, it's not a history lesson tonight, I'm not going to give you the history of the Greeks and the Grecian Empire. It is a very interesting account. If you like history, you should go back and read it in parallel with Daniel 11. Okay, Daniel 12. You could say it's a vision. I don't know if it's really a vision. It's basically just Daniel talking with Christ, talking with God himself. And we're told in verse 6, and one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Of all these prophecies you've given me, how long till the end of time, when everything's done? Verse 7, the man clothed in linen, which is upon the waters. We're told he held his right hand, his left hand's up to the heavens, swears by them, and he says it shall be for a time and times and a half. That's 3.5 years. One time, times, 2 times, that's 3.5. That's 3.5 years. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. He says after 3.5 years. Wait, after 3.5 years of what? After 3.5 years from this prophecy? No, obviously not, because Daniel was already given 490 years. This man, who I believe is Christ, is reminding Daniel. Remember I told you that final 7 weeks is going to be split into 2 3.5-year periods? And at the middle, 3.5 years, you're going to find desolation, right, in the temple. And then 3.5 more years, and then the Messiah will come, destroy his enemies, and usher the saints into eternal reign with him. He's reminding him of that final 3.5 years. And he's saying after that final 3.5 years, that is the end of times, basically. Now, he says, verse 9, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white. Verse 11, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that shall be made desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. That's 3.5 years. And then, but go thy way, and verse 12, blessed is he that waiteth, and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. That's 3.5 years. Now, not exact. One is just shy of 3.5, and one is just over 3.5. Again, what time period is this man, who I think it is Jesus, talking of? That final week of Daniel's prophecy, that final 7 years. And he says, look, from the time of that first part of the week to the time of the desolation of the temple is 3.5 years. And by the way, he gives an exact day. So if you're a Jew or a Christian who gets saved after the rapture, and you know the exact day of the rapture, you will know the exact day that the Antichrist will set up the desolation of the temple. It's given to us here, by the day. From the time the temple is desecrated, you will then know the exact day of the return of Christ. You say, well, Pastor Russ, wasn't it told us that no man knows the return of Christ? Look, no man knows now because of the rapture. All I can think of is one of two things. Christ, when he said no man knows, is referring to no man knows until that final week, without saying that, because we're given the final week to the day of this to this and of this to this. Or he's generalizing. I'm not really comfortable with the idea that this here is generalizing because he's giving us specific days. So I think what Christ is talking about is when he says no man knows the day of my return, he's talking about no man knows when this final week is going to take place, because no man knows when the rapture will be. But once the rapture is here, there's a countdown. And we've been given that countdown. And if you're smart enough to count the days, you'll know how much longer you have to go. What Daniel says, blessed is he that waiteth. You'll know how much longer you have to wait till the final day. But you won't know that final day until the rapture, until Christ comes back for his church. And that's the book of Daniel. 7:15, right on the dot. How about that? I just crammed one semester into an hour. Okay. Any questions or comments about what we covered? Yes, Rose?
Why did he give us 3 different stories?
I know. Of all the same thing, right? Why 3 different visions or stories about the Medes and the Persians? Why do we find the same truth, moral truth, expectation from God, God's desire for our lives over and over and over again in the Word of God? Why couldn't God just give us everything once? It'd be a much shorter book, would it not? The Bible? Why does he give it to us so many times? In case you understand, the first time, I know as a teacher when I repeat something, it's to show emphasis. If we don't understand it the first time, we can just go back and read it over and over again. But when I see something repeated over and over again, I think I need to know that. As a student, when a teacher teaches me something over and over again, I better write that in my notes. That's probably going to be on the test. So, God's the great teacher. God's trying to give us emphasis. This was an important thing for God to tell us. The transition from the Medo-Persian Empire to the Grecian. When I say us, not to say you and me, Rose. Remember, this is a prophecy to the who? The Jews. It was important to the Jews. Should have been important to the Jews. Jimmy.
This prophecy is the most detailed prophecy in the Bible for content and
With Alexander the Great.
yeah, and all the things that could go wrong, but they didn't.
Yes.
So
You're talking about chapter 9? Or are you talking about chapter
all of
11 or 10?
all of Daniel.
Oh, all of them. Okay.
So specifically the the vision, the setting up the different kingdoms.
Yeah.
So again, the Bible's an eternal book. It's before us. It's going to be after us. So I go back to like Romans 11. Hath God cast away His people? God forbid. So He's going to set the Jews back up, and He's going to deal with this specifically.
Yeah.
But there's still a big group of people who think that God's done with the Jews. That
Yeah.
that
You're right.
Somehow the church has replaced them. But that's false. So anyways, I like the detailed prophecy because it gives me confidence, more confidence that the Bible is perfect.
Yeah.
But then again, these prophecies may not have to do with me because the Bible is going to outlive me.
Yeah. But indirectly, it has to do with us because it increases our faith when we see how God deals with other people and how He fulfills the promises He gave to the Jews. All right, good. Yes, Carla.
You mentioned that Daniel lived quite a while. He was around for Nebuchadnezzar, and when he's giving these prophecies, isn't he in the Medo-Persian Empire?
Some are. I told you which ones he was in and which one were Babylon. Chapter 8, it was Babylon.
But
Chapter.
he's not around. Does he actually see the Greeks come in?
Oh, not the Greeks. No.
So
No.
that's why I'm thinking he gets these 2 or 3. He had 2 for Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm thinking God's saying, you're only in the Medo-Persian.
Yes, He's not going to make it past the Medo-Persian.
Is coming, and when God says it more than once, I think it does get our attention.
Yeah, and for the Jews, by the way, they had it pretty good under the Babylons. Yes, the Babylonians did come in and wreak havoc. But remember, the exiles they brought in were kind of just given a new life. And in fact, when they were allowed to go back, a lot of them chose not to. They loved Babylon so much they stayed. So the Babylonians were pretty good. Remember I told you the Medes and Persians? They were actually kind of good too. It's kind of like, hey, everything as normal, just, nothing to see here. The Medes and the Persians were not too cruel to the Jews. In fact, it was under the Medes and the Persians that they were allowed to do what? Go back home. Under the Greeks, that was a difficult time for the Jews. It was during the Grecian Empire that Jews were severely persecuted. And so God is just forewarning the Jews of what's to come. You've had it good. You've had it easy. Even in my judgment of exile, it was still a pretty soft judgment. But the Grecian Empire is going to be harsh. Anyone else? All right, well, let's pray. Father, I thank you for the time together and to look into your word again and to see the fulfillment of prophecy and what it means for the faith we can have in your word and Scripture, knowing that we can fully trust it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, have a great night.